Today is the 12th of March 2009. We have a special guest at the school today, Mr. Michael Filtz. He's the longest serving teacher in the 100-year history of the school. So I'd just like to welcome Michael today for our interview. You're from Wisconsin?
That's right.
So maybe just tell us about your early days.
Well, I went to Wisconsin State University, and this was during the time of the Vietnam War, so everybody was going to university, and even to the stage that everybody wanted to be a school teacher. And from what I can remember, when I was about 10, I always had a desire to be a teacher, and that was my sort of goal. And my family being, on my father's side, being very large, education wasn't of any great importance, so I was sort of battling with that instead of going out and working in the working force as a tradesman or something. And so I went to uni, and I had to go on my own, and I left on my own, and I paid for my own. And I, on the advice of my art teacher in high school, I pursued that, wanting to do that career, because I realized that I had a talent, or he said I had a talent, and then I realized it, and so I kept doing that. And then when it came to teaching, I worked in an opportunity school in the United States for a little while, and you couldn't get a job because every time you went to get a job, there was like 150 people looking for a position as a teacher. And one of the young ladies that I was taking out, her landlady said and she was Australian, and she said they're looking for teachers in Australia. So I wrote a letter to the Australian consulate in New York, and then I got all this feedback and mail and everything, and they offered me a position, and they also said that they'd pay for my passage. And it was the greatest adventure of my life, because I had never seen an ocean. I'd never seen any of America outside the dairy state of Wisconsin, just cows and all that goes with it. And I traveled across and got on this boat and came to Australia, and that was another experience, because we had saved enough money. I came with a friend, and we went first class, and that was a mistake. I remember going down to dinner. It was the first time I'd ever seen so much cutlery on the table.
What year was this?
This would have been in 1969. And so I had to get familiar with everything else. And once I got here, I stayed at Erskineville, and I lived with the station master at Erskineville, which was the connection that I had, which gave me the opportunity to come to Australia because I had someone to sponsor me. So I lived at Erskineville for a while, and I didn't get the position in the public system. So I worked in Double Bay, so you can imagine working in Double Bay at Woolworths, which is what I did when I was at uni, working in a supermarket, and living in Erskineville in a very hovel place. And then someone said, try private school. So I looked in the paper, and there was Myers Brothers Cobra looking for an art teacher, English and social science teacher, so I applied for it. I made an appointment, and I'll never forget the day. It was the 9th of March, actually. And I came, and 7:30 at night, 8 o'clock I had the job, and that was the interview. 15 minutes it took.
Who was the interview with?
Was Brother Baptist, who I just found recently just passed away. And I came all dressed up, and I didn't know, I mean, being young, and I wanted to be trendy, so I had pink flares on and a baby blue shirt, French collar, and all this stuff. And I went into this class, and 3 brothers sat at the back row. One was the director of the brothers, one Brother Coleman and Brother Baptist, and then there was, I think, the deputy, Brother Lewis. They all sat in the back row, and there were 52 students in the class. And I had to teach my first lesson, which was the 7 one-act plays of Merchant of Venice, which I had no clue what that was going to be all about. And it was the Reluctant Dragon. And it was this puffy dragon who didn't want to go and meet St. George. So I just used my creativity, and I pointed out a narrator and a dragon and a Maid Marian and said, would you read these parts? And then I did what I found to be what we call the Ralph Harris technique. And I took a box of colored chalk. As they went through the play, I drew a scene from the play of the dragon, and I couldn't I was so stunned by the fact the way the brothers just sat there and looked. I think they were more amused than the kids. There wasn't a sound, everyone did their part, and then they applauded, and then brother came up and said, "You've got the job." And then so I had to resign from my job at Woolworths at Double Bay and came here and stayed for 38 years. And the reason for that is, and many people say, "Why did you stay?" I said, because I couldn't find a better place. Art wasn't a big thing in those days. It seemed to be one of the lesser subjects. You were sort of a nobody if you did art, because it had to be sport and all these other things. And so I decided to use, again, my creativity and got involved in the sport by making banners, got involved in anything else that needed visual stimulus, and we proceeded to move on. And then got in charge of the art department, built an art department, and I'm proud to say that we had started a class of 6 for Year 12 and passed state school inspections. And of course, anytime there was anything going on, because my theory in education is to motivate students to do things, motivate to discover their talent, and there were all kinds of obstacles because it was reading, writing, and arithmetic. And then,
sounds
of course,
very similar to today.
Conrad then started to have the reputation of being sort of like the experimental school, where they try all these new things and they never go through it all. They'd condemn it before we finished the end. I mean, even the Wyndham scheme, I remember having a big battle with the heads at the school saying, you never really tried it because you don't have the facilities, you don't have the rooms, you don't have the labs, you don't have the lab assistants and everything else. But I didn't worry about it. I used to have, parent interviews. I'd go to the homes and have my interviews. And I remember having an interview at the Fisherman's Club with a parent having dinner. That they asked me to come and do that, and everyone said, "What's he doing? What's he up to?" And I said, "Well, I'm doing what I thought was the tradition of the Mara schools, was to motivate the students, be a part of that family, encourage them to promote the talents of the student, and to discover those talents." And we carried on, and I ended up having to teach religion. And I upset them in many times that way too, because I didn't do it in the conventional way. Until we later started to get people like Helen Smith, who had balloons at Mass, and not breaking the rules, but putting the rules aside to see what the needs were of the kids and the parents, and keep up with the family tradition. As time went on, it got harder, because everybody was not looking at that. They were more looking at their positions, where they were going in their job, and how the school was being noticed in public with regard to what programs and everything else. And we started to be controlled by mission statements or controlled by outcomes. We started to be controlled by machines, and even like a computer trying to tell you that you don't know the student. I know the student, because the numbers are there and that's what you have to give, and there's no sort of difference there.
That's interesting, because last week we had Professor Steve King from Western Sydney come along, and he said something very similar, and a person that really affected him was Kenny Boothroyd, the PE teacher who you would not expect. And he said from his time here in the late 60s, people like Ken motivated him. So
and I can remember Ken Boothroyd started at the same time I did.
He did.
And we had both had this of building the confidence of the students. And I can remember him saying, coming up to the staff room, and we used to have a tiny little staff room, and the brothers used to be in the building, the huge building, administration building was all brothers, and we just had one little room, and all the teachers just sat together, the lay teachers, and he'd come in excited because he finally got someone to get on the high bar, or somebody that just jumped over the horse, and you could see the delight he had and getting the kids, that student to have trust in himself and everything else. And I feel that sometimes we've lost that because we're so tied up with the paperwork, and we're so tied up with reports, and that we've forgotten that the student, and I think Marshall Champagne said that in all his work, was to get that student to come to school and want to come to school and want to learn.